You can't go in there. A small, sharp voice halted a corporate titan at the very threshold of disaster. The lobby of the Omni Tower, Ethan Blake's empire, was a masterpiece of cold, corporate ambition. Polished obsidian and chrome reflecting the harsh, unforgiving light. It was a space meticulously designed to filter out the weak and welcome only those with power. The air smelled faintly of expensive leather and fear of missed deadlines. Executives glided past, their voices muffled against their phone screens, while the rhythmic, sharp tap of high heels echoed like a metronome counting down to the next deal. Ethan moved with the tailored precision of a predator, his posture flawlessly straight, his bespoke suit a shield of confidence. His intense blue eyes were locked on the red glow of the digital clock above the elevator bank. He was 3 minutes late, an inexcusable breach of his own protocol, especially today. Upstairs, the meeting that awaited him was not merely important. It was an inflection point, capable of reshaping entire industries and determining the fate of his own dynasty. Years of ruthless dedication had condensed into the span of one critical hour. Every second was currency. His 2 closest security agents formed an almost invisible barrier around him, subtly clearing his path. The elevator arrived with a nearly silent sigh, the doors parting to reveal a highly reflective, mirrored car interior that duplicated Ethan's composed, almost severe expression. He stepped inside, his mind already running a cascade of numbers and strategies, when the fragile quiet was violently fractured. You can't go in there. The plea was startling, entirely out of place in this cathedral of commerce. Ethan froze mid-stride. The doors, sensing his momentary pause, hesitated before beginning their slow, inexorable slide shut. Irritation, hot and immediate, tightened his jaw. He spun around, ready to deliver a curt dismissal, and that was the moment he saw her. Standing perhaps 10 feet away was a little girl, certainly no older than 7. Her pale, almost colorless blonde hair was constrained in a severe ponytail, and her oversized blue eyes, now wide and luminous, were fixed on him with desperate urgency. She wore a simple white dress, carefully maintained but clearly threadbare. Clutched tightly in both hands was a red, hard-shell briefcase, almost cartoonishly large against her small torso. Her knuckles were white with the tension of her grip. Ethan's frown deepened. "This is a restricted area," he stated, his voice clipped and cold. "Where is your guardian?" She took a wobbly step toward him, shaking her head quickly. "Please," she insisted again, her voice wavering dangerously, yet infused with undeniable steel. "You really can't go up there. It's not safe." Against all logic, something in the texture of her tone stopped him. It wasn't the manufactured drama of a child seeking attention. It was raw, immediate certainty, the sound of someone desperately trying to beat the clock. One of his guards moved, ready to sweep the child away, but Ethan lifted his hand without shifting his gaze from the girl's face. "What are you talking about?" he demanded. She opened her mouth, then glanced frantically at the elevator, as if the machine itself was an enemy about to betray them. "The cables," she whispered, her voice almost lost in the lobby's hum. "They said the cables wouldn't hold." The elevator doors began their final closure. Ethan's phone vibrated violently in his jacket pocket, the screen blazing with an urgent incoming call from his partner already upstairs. Instinctively, he glanced down. A microsecond of distraction, a lifetime saved. In that split instant, the girl's face contorted with sheer terror. "No!" she cried out. "Please!" The doors hissed shut. Ethan recoiled automatically, his hand already lifting to answer the call. His focus momentarily cleaved between the business waiting above and the strange prophecy below. The elevator car smoothly began its ascent, carrying his entire security detail and 3 other unsuspecting tower employees. The girl stood petrified before him, her chest barely moving, her wide eyes locked on the now sealed steel doors. For a beat of eternity, there was silence. Then the world shattered. A profound, sickening grind tore through the tower structure, followed instantly by screams and the deafening shriek of alarms. The floor beneath their feet didn't just vibrate. It shook with a physical violence. Chaos erupted. People shouted, security detail rushed forward, and the emergency lights pulsed a jarring red. Ethan stood rooted, his blood roaring in his ears, watching the digital indicator display above the elevator shaft. The numbers that had marked the ascent now scrolled backward with dizzying, fatal speed. He slowly turned back toward the spot where she had been standing. She was gone. Only the horrific realization remained. If he had been merely seconds slower, if he had ignored her completely, he would be plummeting inside that steel coffin. The sensation of being alive had never been so acutely, terrifyingly fragile. The lobby descended into immediate, primal disorder. The highly polished calm of the building's facade fractured entirely. Alarms blared a relentless warning, red panic lights strobed along the walls, and people dashed everywhere, some paralyzed by shock, others shouting unanswered names. Ethan remained at the epicenter of the destruction, staring transfixed at the silent elevator bank as uniformed emergency responders streamed through the main doors. His head of security, who had been standing outside the car moments before it closed, grabbed Ethan's arm, yanking him back just as the first grim reports crackled over the radio. The elevator had dropped multiple floors before the emergency governors managed to engage. There were severe injuries, possibly fatalities. Ethan barely registered the clinical details. His ears were ringing, his heart hammered a painful rhythm against his ribs, and one thought cycled with merciless clarity. Asterisk if not for the girl. He scanned the stampeding crowd desperately, shoving past stunned employees and shaken executives, searching for that telltale flash of white cotton or the unmistakable red of the small briefcase. She was nowhere. It was as if she had been an ethereal mechanism of warning, vanishing the instant her task was fulfilled, leaving behind only the echo of her words and the overwhelming weight of the disaster she had averted. "Find her," Ethan ordered, his voice raw and razor-sharp, turning to his chief of security. The child. Blonde hair, white dress, red bag. She was right here. The man nodded instantly and began barking commands, but Ethan recognized the doubt in his eyes. In a building of this scale, in this hurricane of panic, finding a single small child was like trying to capture a whisper in a tempest. Paramedics rushed past, stretchers clattering. The full, horrifying reality of what had occurred slammed into Ethan. His security detail, the men who had protected him for years, had been in that car. Guilt, sudden and paralyzing, cut through the shock. He should have been with them. He should have been taking their place. As the lobby was evacuated and cordoned off with bright yellow tape, Ethan was escorted into a sterile conference room on the ground floor. The silence felt oppressive, sealed off from the noise, yet his hands still shook uncontrollably as he poured a glass of cold water he wouldn't drink. His phone buzzed like an angry insect with messages from the board, media contacts, and partners, but he ignored it all. He couldn't banish the image of the girl's face. Her eyes had not registered fear when she warned him, but a strange, terrifying certainty, as if she were racing against an inevitable outcome. The memory sent a deep, unnerving chill through him that no rational explanation could dispel. Investigators arrived quickly, precise, focused, and unrelenting. Ethan answered everything truthfully, describing the girl in painstaking detail, repeating her exact whispered words. Several officers exchanged uncomfortable glances when he mentioned the cables. "Has anyone reported maintenance deficiencies recently?" one officer asked. Ethan's jaw tightened. "No," he said, the lie tasting like ash. "Not officially." The implication hung heavy in the air, weighted with complicity and neglect. When the immediate questioning concluded, Ethan stood and began to pace the opulent room, the polished mahogany table and soft leather chairs suddenly feeling utterly meaningless. He needed answers, and more urgently he needed the girl found. Not for a press statement. She had delivered her warning, and then she had dissolved back into the shadows of the building. Another invisible presence that the corporate world was designed to overlook. But Ethan saw her now, standing there holding the scuffed, red briefcase amid the ruins of the disaster. He made a silent vow. He would find her no matter the cost. The red briefcase lay on the temporary folding table in the investigator's command room like a quiet, silent accusation. Ethan had placed it gently among the stacks of incident reports and the harsh glow of security monitors, treating it as if it were fragile and sentient. The edges were worn down, clearly old, the handle smoothed slick by countless hours of small hands gripping it tightly. Whatever was inside, it had been important enough for a child to protect it with fear. Ethan watched the security technicians review the lobby camera feeds. Angles shifted, timestamps sped backward and forward, faces blurred into a generalized panicked mass. Then she appeared. The girl in the white dress moved swiftly across the frame, her head slightly bowed, her steps light and purposeful. She knew the building with an intimacy known only to those who spend vast amounts of time unnoticed. "She knows this place," one of the lead investigators murmured, clearly disturbed. Ethan nodded grimly. "Better than we do." The footage eventually traced her exit through a remote service door near the underground parking access. After that, she vanished from the cameras entirely. "She lives here," Ethan stated quietly, the conviction in his voice eliminating any doubt. Further investigation confirmed his hypothesis. The tower employed scores of night maintenance and cleaning staff, many of whom, unable to afford childcare in the city, routinely brought their children with them during long shifts. These children were instructed to be silent, to stay out of sight, to blend into the shadows. The girl in the white dress was one of them. Her name surfaced hours later in the contracted employee records. Emily Carter, age 7, daughter of Maria Carter, a cleaner assigned to the upper executive floors. Ethan closed his eyes briefly, absorbing the wave of complex emotions. Relief that she was real, not a hallucination of shock. Anger that someone so vital had been so close, so visible, and yet entirely invisible to the world he inhabited. He requested to speak to Maria immediately. They found Maria in a small, cramped break room in the maintenance wing, sitting alone, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She looked utterly spent, her uniform wrinkled, her eyes swollen red from crying. When Ethan entered, she sprang to her feet, naked fear flashing across her face. "I didn't mean to cause trouble," Maria stammered immediately. "Emily," she didn't understand. "She saved my life," Ethan interrupted gently. Maria froze, staring at him as if he were speaking an alien language. "She told me not to get in the elevator," he continued, the memory crystal clear. She knew something was wrong. Maria's fragile composure instantly shattered. She collapsed back into the chair, covering her face with shaking hands. "I told her to stay quiet," she whispered, tears choking her words. "I told her never to talk to anyone important. She hears things. She notices everything. I was so afraid for her." A heavy knot of sorrow and guilt formed in Ethan's chest. "Where is she now?" Maria looked up, genuine panic flooding her expression. "I don't know." She ran. "She does that when she thinks she's done something wrong." The realization hit him with sickening force. Emily hadn't vanished because of the accident. She had vanished because she believed she had broken the rules of invisibility and was anticipating punishment. "I need to find her," Ethan stated firmly, "and I need to ensure she is safe." Maria hesitated, uncertainty and a lifetime of mistrust warring across her face. Years of being ignored and dismissed had taught her that people like Ethan Blake didn't offer help without exacting a price. "You don't have to be afraid," Ethan added, lowering his voice until it was almost a plea. "I will not let anything happen to her or to you." It was the first time someone of his stature had ever uttered those words to someone like her and truly meant them. While his security team fanned out across the building and surrounding streets, Ethan remained with Maria, listening as she haltingly spoke about Emily. Her love for reading, how the red briefcase carried her schoolwork and her mother's pill organizer, how she hated loud noises but watched people with unnerving intensity, always dissecting the silent subtext. With every detail, the weight of responsibility on Ethan grew heavier. Emily hadn't just cried a warning. She had consciously broken the rules of her constrained existence and stepped into danger because no one else would have listened. Finding her was no longer just important. It was an act of personal redemption. The search dragged deep into the evening, pushing past the glass and steel boundaries of the corporate tower. Security teams meticulously combed every parking garage, forgotten stairwell, storage room, and service corridor. Ethan refused to leave Maria's side, unwilling to let her face her fear alone. The building that once symbolized his unwavering control now felt like an intricate maze filled with the blind spots he had cultivated through years of systemic indifference. Maria compulsively wrung her hands, her eyes darting toward every shadow. "She hides when she's scared," she said, her voice shaking badly. "She thinks adults get angry when she speaks up. I tried to teach her to stay invisible. I thought that would keep her safe." Ethan felt those words, *invisible*, land like a physical blow. The irony was absolute and cruel. If Emily hadn't broken the rule of being unseen, if she hadn't shouted, he would be dead. They found Emily almost 2 hours later. She was curled tightly in a narrow, cold maintenance corridor, beneath a metal staircase leading to the lower basement levels. She sat on the cold concrete floor, knees hugged to her chest. The white dress was smudged with dust, and the red briefcase rested beside her like a sturdy, familiar shield. When the flashlight beam located her, she didn't cry or call out. She simply looked up, her blue eyes wary but steady, already prepared for the consequences of her actions. Maria rushed forward, sinking to her knees and pulling Emily into a wrenching embrace, sobbing with raw relief. Emily stiffened for a moment, then relaxed slightly, still gripping the briefcase handle. "I'm sorry, Mama," she whispered into her mother's shoulder. "I didn't want to get in trouble." Ethan knelt a few steps away, keeping a deliberate, respectful distance, aware that his towering presence could feel overwhelming. "You are not in trouble," he said gently. "You did something incredibly brave." Emily glanced at him, then immediately looked away. "I wasn't supposed to talk," she insisted. "But they said the cables were bad. I heard them yesterday." Maria froze, pulling back slightly. "Who said that, Mija?" "The men," Emily replied. "The ones in the fancy suits. They were arguing. One of them said the elevator wouldn't make it past the top floors." The word arguing sent a cold wave of realization through the small group gathered in the narrow corridor. Ethan felt an icy anger ignite in his chest, sharp and targeted. This was not negligence. This was deliberate sabotage. "You did exactly the right thing," Ethan affirmed, his voice now ringing with authority. "You saved lives." Emily looked at him again, this time with pure confusion rather than fear. "I did?" "Yes," he answered without hesitation. "Mine included." For a long moment, she held his gaze, evaluating him, deciding whether to trust the impossible statement. Then her shoulders slumped minimally, the tension in her small frame easing just a fraction. They moved to a quieter room nearby, where Emily was given water and a blanket. She held the red briefcase firmly on her lap, refusing to be parted from it. Ethan noticed the way she nestled close to her mother while keeping her attention fixed on him, studying his expressions with the same meticulous scrutiny she had used in the lobby. "What's in the bag?" he asked softly, trying not to startle her. Emily hesitated, then opened the clasp just enough to reveal the contents. Neat notebooks filled with careful penmanship, a worn public library book, and a small, segmented pill organizer. "It's Mama's medicine," she explained simply. "I carry it so she doesn't forget." The quiet, intense sense of responsibility in her voice struck him deeply. This child wasn't just observant. She was a self-appointed protector. Later, after Maria and Emily had been safely escorted to a secure area, Ethan stood alone in the corridor, staring at the scuffed concrete where they had been found. He felt an irreversible shift inside him. The elevator sabotage would be investigated, the guilty parties punished, the building repaired. But none of that addressed the underlying danger. The real threat wasn't only in the snapping cables. It was in the institutional silence that had nearly swallowed a child who held the truth and had been taught never to speak it. Ethan knew, with absolute and terrifying certainty, that he could never allow that to happen again. The following days unfolded beneath a heavy cloud of investigation and tension, yet beneath it ran a steady, unwavering current of Ethan's determination. Emily and Maria were quietly relocated to a secure temporary apartment arranged by Ethan's legal team, far from the Omni Tower and shielded from the media frenzy. The space was modest but immaculate, flooded with natural light, and for the first time in memory, Maria slept soundly. Emily, however, remained vigilant, her instincts refusing to stand down so easily. Ethan visited frequently, always announcing his arrival beforehand, always keeping his movements slow and predictable. He understood that trust could neither be rushed nor demanded, particularly from a child who had learned that powerful adults only listened when it served them. Initially, Emily was reserved, answering questions politely but briefly, her red briefcase never more than an arm's reach away. She watched him the way she watched everything else, carefully measuring not his promises, but his consistency. The official investigation progressed rapidly. Emily's testimony, delivered with a quiet, factual clarity that unsettled even the most seasoned interrogators, filled the crucial evidentiary gaps. She recounted voices, fragments of overheard arguments, descriptions of men in suits that she had absorbed while sitting silently behind cleaning carts or on hidden stairwells. She offered no drama, only the quiet, objective truth as she had heard it. That truth confirmed sabotage beyond any doubt. Maria struggled deeply with guilt, her voice breaking one evening as she spoke to Ethan in the small kitchen. "I told her to stay quiet," she confessed. "I thought silence would be her best protection." Ethan shook his head firmly. "You were trying to keep her safe in a world that doesn't make room for people like you," he replied. "The fault is not yours." Emily overheard them from the doorway. She stepped forward hesitantly. "Mama did the best she could," she said softly. "She always does." Ethan crouched down, meeting Emily at eye level. "And so did you," he said. "You were brave when it mattered most." A subtle shift occurred. Emily didn't smile, but she met his gaze without flinching. She studied his face for a long, quiet moment before nodding once, as if finally accepting a difficult, undeniable fact. As news of the Omni Tower incident dominated the media cycles, Ethan worked tirelessly behind the scenes to shield Emily's identity. He refused interviews, redirected investigative attention, and made it unequivocally clear that no child would be turned into a public spectacle for his company's failures. This decision cost him political leverage and strained important relationships, but for the first time in his career, those losses felt entirely insignificant. One afternoon, Ethan brought Emily a new notebook. The cover was a deep, plain blue, completely unmarked. "You don't have to write in it," he said, setting it on the table. "But if you ever want to, it's yours." Emily ran her small fingers thoughtfully over the smooth cover. "Is it safe?" she asked. "Yes," he confirmed. "Nothing you put in it has to be quiet, unless you want it to be." She carefully took the notebook and placed it inside her red briefcase, her grip tightening on the worn leather handle. That evening, as Ethan prepared to leave, Emily followed him to the apartment door. "Are you going to stop coming now?" she asked. "No," he said immediately, meeting her gaze steadily. "I'll keep showing up." She considered this statement, then offered a small, firm nod. "Okay." It was not a promise of gratitude. It was not a sign of affection, but it was undeniably the beginning of something real. As Ethan stepped back into the anonymity of the night, he understood that saving his life had not been the end of his debt, but merely the start. Been the end of Emily's role in this story. It was, rather, the painful, undeniable moment that ripped away Ethan's protective corporate blindness and forced him to fully grasp the perilous consequences of a world that systematically taught its most vulnerable, its children, to remain unseen and unheard. And this time, the urgency was personal. He intended to fundamentally change that world, beginning with the protection and empowerment of Emily. The truth began to surface, not with a sudden, single dramatic crash, but through careful, methodical excavation. It was a grinding process that peeled back layers of corporate deceit, leaving no comfortable space for denial. Investigators meticulously traced the altered maintenance logs, spanning back nearly 6 months. They uncovered a chilling pattern of forged signatures and falsified inspection reports, documents that had been quietly rubber-stamped by mid-level managers who knew precisely the risk they were authorizing. The failure of the elevator system, Ethan learned, was not a random oversight. It had been surgically planned to mimic negligence, a routine, tragic accident that would quickly disappear, swallowed up by paperwork, insurance settlements, and the inevitable cycle of public forgetfulness. Emily's quiet words, however, had transformed the scenario into something else entirely. It was now a meticulously documented crime with malicious intent and a chilling timeline. Ethan sat through the ensuing long briefings, absorbing information far more often than he offered it. His outward expression remained calm, a mask of measured corporate authority, but his mind was relentless, churning through the implications. Each new, damning detail solidified his resolve. The men Emily had overheard were swiftly identified. Their movements were tracked using a combination of digital forensics and old-fashioned detective work. Their encrypted communications were methodically broken down. It was revealed that one of the key players had worked indirectly for Ethan's company, an external contractor who possessed both the access and a clear motive for financial gain or revenge. This was someone who intimately understood the building's operational rhythms and the exact blind spots in its layered security apparatus. The realization that the existential threat had originated from within his own organization made Ethan's stomach twist with a cold, steady, deeply internalized anger. It was betrayal on a scale he had never considered possible. Emily and Maria were brought in to give formal statements. Ethan personally oversaw the arrangements, insisting that the process be handled with profound gentleness. Specialists, child psychologists trained in forensic interviews, were present, ensuring that questions were framed neutrally, without any coercive or intimidating pressure. Emily sat ramrod straight in her designated chair, her hands folded neatly over her iconic red briefcase. She answered with careful, almost unnerving precision. She did not exaggerate or speculate. When a piece of information was unknown to her, she stated so plainly, "I did not see that," or "I cannot be sure." The investigators exchanged discreet glances more than once, visibly impressed by her clarity, yet deeply unsettled by the sheer volume of critical detail she had managed to notice while she herself remained entirely unnoticed. Afterward, Emily's energy was visibly drained. She remained quiet for the rest of the day, staying physically close to Maria. The psychological weight of speaking such immense truths, of carrying that burden of responsibility, had finally caught up to her. Ethan observed her withdrawal but kept a respectful distance, understanding that even the most profound courage had its limitations, and that even the bravest child needed quiet rest from the exhausting performance of strength. That evening, he arranged to speak with Maria alone. They sat across from each other in the small, temporary living room of the apartment he had secured for them, the air thick with the unspoken gravity of their shared experience. "They told me I should be grateful," Maria said quietly, staring down at the frayed hem of her jeans, "that somehow the bad things turned out the way they did. But all I can truly think about is how infinitesimally close I came to losing her forever." Ethan nodded slowly, his gaze steady. "Gratitude," he said, "is a hollow emotion when faced with injustice. It doesn't erase the paralyzing fear, and critically, it certainly doesn't erase responsibility." She finally looked up at him, her eyes tired but holding a quiet, unwavering strength he hadn't noticed before. "What happens to us now?" she asked, the question hanging heavy between them. "When all of this is finally over?" The query lingered, hitting Ethan with force, as he had been asking himself the very same thing. "You won't be forgotten," he stated firmly, meeting her gaze. "Not this time. I will personally ensure your protection, for both of you, until this is settled. And when this case reaches its conclusion, you will have legitimate choices for your future." Maria swallowed hard, a flicker of pride in her eyes. "I don't want charity," she insisted. "I'm not offering charity," Ethan replied, the words slow and deliberate. "I'm offering accountability." The next day, arrests were executed. The news initially broke quietly, an internal memo filtering through regulatory channels, But then it erupted and spread rapidly once the official statements detailing the indictments were released to the press. Sabotage, conspiracy, attempted murder. The words carried a monumental weight, and for the first time, the public narrative shifted decisively away from a faceless, bureaucratic tragedy and toward the stark, criminal truth. Ethan declined all interview requests, releasing only a brief, tightly controlled statement condemning the conspirators' actions and praising the profound courage of those who had dared to speak out. He pointedly did not mention Emily by name, preserving her privacy as long as possible. Ethan felt a sudden, sharp tightness in his chest cavity at her simple words. He understood then that the elevator incident had not only exposed corruption and immediate physical danger. It had exposed a far deeper, more pervasive flaw in the very structure of the world he had spent his life helping to build. A system where essential voices like Emily's were systematically overlooked, ignored, or actively suppressed until the crisis was almost irreversible. As the evening settled fully and the temporary apartment grew hushed, Ethan stood by the window, watching the city lights flicker on. Millions of silent witnesses spread below. For years, he had operated under the immutable belief that success was measured solely in metrics: growth, efficiency, and absolute control. Now, standing in the profound stillness, he knew with absolute certainty that something else mattered infinitely more. Making sure that no child, anywhere, ever again had to shout or risk everything, just to be acknowledged. The public phase of the case unfolded slowly, deliberately, as if the world itself needed an extended period to fully process the catastrophic implications of what had nearly transpired. Court dates were set months in advance. Evidence was presented with meticulous detail, and the names of the conspirators were released with careful legal precision. Ethan attended the very first hearing, sitting quietly in the gallery, positioned far from the media cameras. His attention was fixed not on the accused men, but on the small, steadfast figure seated beside him. Emily sat perfectly straight in her folding chair, her feet just barely failing to touch the floor, her hands clasped protectively over her red briefcase, as if it were an immutable anchor securing her to the reality of the moment. She didn't appear visibly afraid, but she certainly did not look untouched either. This was emphatically not a place meant for children. Yet here she was, present because the pursuit of justice, the very requirement of truth, had demanded her presence. When the hearing was finally adjourned, they stepped outside into the vast, open air of the city street. Emily inhaled a deep, shuddering breath, as though she had been holding it throughout the lengthy proceedings. "They looked smaller in there," she said softly, tilting her head. Ethan instantly understood her meaning. Power, stripped of its camouflage and exposed under the harsh, truthful light of the court, always shrank. "That's exactly what happens when lies finally run out of places to hide," he replied. Life began to settle into a new, firmer shape after that pivotal day. Maria was offered a permanent position with stable hours and proper, comprehensive benefits, presented not as a gesture of pity or a favor, but as a deliberate professional correction. Emily began attending a nearby school, one chosen carefully and discreetly, a place where she could learn and grow without the perpetual feeling of being watched or whispered about. On her first day, she clutched her red briefcase with the same sober seriousness she had displayed in the corporate lobby weeks earlier. Then, she paused just at the ornate iron gate and turned back, her face suddenly serious. "You'll still come, right?" she asked, a sliver of doubt in her voice. "Yes," Ethan said without the slightest hesitation, walking toward her. "Every single day I can." She nodded once, deeply reassured, and walked inside the building without looking back. Ethan stood there for a long moment, watching until her small figure disappeared into the doorway, feeling a profound, unfamiliar mix of pride and protective tenderness settle deep into his chest. In the evenings, Emily began to talk more freely, discussing things mundane and ordinary that had once felt impossibly out of reach. She talked about a classmate who generously shared her brightly colored pencils, a teacher who smelled pleasantly of soap and lemons, and, best of all, a library with a specific window seat she loved because it allowed her to watch the ebb and flow of people outside without being directly seen herself. Ethan listened intently, as if these small details were the most critical data he had ever been entrusted with, because in a way that mattered deeply they absolutely were. One night, as they sat together at the small, square kitchen table, Emily suddenly asked, the question deceptively quiet but carrying immense philosophical weight. Why did no one listen before? Ethan did not answer immediately. He wanted his response to be honest, yet he did not want to burden her with the adult bitterness of societal failure. Because people get used to not looking down, he said finally, choosing his words with care. They forget that truly important, life-saving things don't always originate from important, powerful places. She considered this perspective, then frowned slightly, a wrinkle forming between her brows. That's not fair. No, he agreed immediately. It isn't. A comfortable silence settled between them now, no longer tense or fraught. Emily opened her blue notebook and slid it across the table, showing him a page filled with careful, looping handwriting and small, precise drawings of elevator panels, closed doors, and stick figures with speech bubbles hovering above their heads. I'm writing about things that almost happened, she explained. So, I remember exactly why it matters that I spoke. Ethan felt a deep, emotional knot tighten behind his ribs. You don't have to carry that weight alone, he said gently, reaching out to cover her small hand with his own. She looked up at him, her eyes searching his face, looking for an assurance deeper than simple words. You won't forget, will you? No, he promised, his voice firm and unwavering. I swear to you I will not forget. The trial proceeded, and with it came inevitable, wide-ranging consequences for his firm. Contracts were subjected to rigorous review. Safety protocols were not just updated, they were completely rewritten, focusing on human checks rather than documentation. Policies were fundamentally changed, implemented not merely in theory, but strictly enforced in daily practice. Ethan insisted on this personal oversight, systematically rejecting all proposals for shortcuts and quiet, expedient settlements. Some longtime partners eventually pushed back against the loss of efficiency. Others simply walked away. He let them go without regret. One evening, as he watched Emily sleeping peacefully on the couch, her red briefcase resting loyally beside her like a small, silent guard, Ethan finally understood the full, transformative weight of what had truly changed. He had survived the mechanical failure of the elevator. But that, he knew, was not the miracle. The miracle was that a child who had been systematically taught to remain silent had spoken anyway, against all her learned instincts, and in doing so, had forced a powerful man like him to finally, genuinely listen. And this time, he knew he would never stop listening. A year passed quietly, unmarked by sensational headlines or dramatic milestones. And that precise stillness was exactly how Ethan wanted it to be. The world, when it remembered the elevator incident at all, recalled it as a narrowly avoided public tragedy, a standard case study in corporate sabotage and the eventual demand for accountability. But for Ethan, time had reshaped that incident into something far more personal and visceral. The building had been fully repaired, completely redesigned with an emphasis on transparency, and reopened with stringent new safety standards so strict and comprehensive they rapidly became a model for the entire industry. Yet Ethan rarely visited it anymore. His life and his purpose had shifted elsewhere. Emily grew comfortably into the space she had once only traversed in silence. She walked to school now with a natural confidence, her iconic red briefcase replaced by a worn backpack covered in the small, eclectic keychains she had started to collect. Though, she still kept the briefcase safely tucked beneath her bed. Some habits, she'd explained, were too important to discard. They were monuments to remembrance. She laughed more easily, spoke without visibly rehearsing every word, and no longer flinched involuntarily at the sound of closing elevator doors or sudden alarms. The fear had not vanished entirely, scars rarely do, but it no longer governed her existence. Maria, too, changed fundamentally. The constant, bone-deep exhaustion that had once defined her posture and demeanor softened significantly as true stability took root. She no longer apologized implicitly for existing in rooms meant for others. She spoke up when something felt wrong at work or in life, her voice now steady and firm. When Ethan observed this profound shift, he realized how deeply and silently that culture of mandated silence had shaped not just Emily's childhood, but Maria's entire adult life. One afternoon, they stood together in the sleek, newly reconstructed lobby of the tower. It looked markedly different now, warmer somehow, designed with abundant natural light and open sight lines. Emily walked slowly, her hand lightly brushing the wall as she approached the bank of elevators. She stopped precisely where it had all begun and looked up at Ethan, her gaze clear. "They listen now," she stated simply. "Yes," he replied, nodding slowly. "Because you taught them how." She pressed the call button herself this time, watching the polished doors glide open without a hint of fear or hesitation. When they closed and the elevator rose smoothly and silently, she smiled, small but genuine, and leaned back against the mirrored panel. Ethan watched her reflection in the glass and felt a quiet, profound sense of peace settle over his heart. That evening, as they sat at home, Emily pulled out her blue notebook for what he intuitively knew would be the last time. The pages were now completely filled, not with diagrams or warnings, but with stories, ordinary stories of school days, casual conversations, small, fleeting moments she simply didn't want to disappear from her memory. "I think I don't need this anymore," she said, closing the cover gently. Ethan looked at her, surprised by the finality of the action. "Are you sure?" She nodded. "I know people will listen now, and if they don't, I know how to make them." He smiled, feeling the absolute truth of that statement settle deep within him. Later, after Emily had finally gone to bed, Ethan stood alone by the window, gazing out at the grid of city lights below. He thought about the man he had been before the elevator incident, the man who measured success in deals and deadlines, who believed danger could always be managed and contained as long as it was meticulously documented. That man had certainly survived the physical event. But the man standing there now had been fundamentally and irrevocably changed. Not by fear, not by the threat of ruin, but by the quiet, unstoppable resolve of a child who simply refused to stay silent. In the end, it wasn't the broken mechanism of the elevator that mattered most. It was the moment a small, previously ignored voice finally spoke up in a vast, indifferent world that had meticulously trained itself not to hear. And this time the world had listened.